If you are a somewhat regular anime watcher or manga reader, you are probably familiar with DANDADAN, which has recently gotten an anime adaptation from the studio Science Saru. With the first season of the anime having concluded and a second season confirmed for July of 2025, there are some things I would like to mention about the anime adaptation that really stood out to me, and some things overall about the anime/manga that are worth bringing up and might influence somebody's decision on whether or not to check out the series. DANDADAN is a manga that is serialized in Shonen Jump Plus, which is an online equivalent to Weekly Shonen Jump, the manga magazine. It started serialization in April of 2021, and it is written by Yukinobu Tatsu, who is most well known for being an assistant on Tatsuki Fujimoto's Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man. DANDADAN is a story about teenagers Momo Ayase and Ken Takakura. Ken believes that aliens exist but spirits don't exist, and Momo believes that aliens don't exist but spirits do exist. The two end up playfully daring each other to go visit a spot where aliens and ghosts are commonly known as appearing, and they individually discover that aliens and spirits both exist, which paves the way for a frenetically paced story that doesn't allow the characters to rest, as aliens and spirits could be around any corner with unknown motives as to why they keep chasing down our main characters, all while a youthful romance starts to grow between the two protagonists of the story. DANDADAN's narrative definitely has some flaws and or things worth critiquing, and I think the anime adaptation really illuminated that for me personally. We will definitely get to talking about the things I believe DANDADAN needs to improve on, or things that the anime staff producing DANDADAN's anime need to be aware of when continuing to work on it. That said, I would like to talk about the things that stand out to me as being of value with DANDADAN's narrative before I ultimately go into those gripes I have with it. I think when DANDADAN wants to be empathetic, it has probably one of the strongest emotional cores out of any action shonen out there. DANDADAN comes off as almost very juvenile or frankly stupid in how it presents and navigates a lot of concepts. The stupid side of DANDADAN is almost like a mask that it wears to get you to put down your guard, and when you least expect it, it gut punches you with an incredibly heartfelt set of emotions, which presents this idea that humanity can be found in more places than just humans, like with how certain spirits or aliens have more of a story to them than their antagonism towards the main characters would initially make you think. DANDADAN is also a fantastic example of action shonen writing towards the sense of something like later JoJo arcs, or the Eternity Devil arc in Chainsaw Man, mainly where the focus of a fight isn't necessarily on how to directly beat a threat, and more how to navigate around something that can't be defeated in order to achieve a form of win condition. The most immediate example that comes to mind is within chapter 2 when Momo and Okarun need to fight the Flatwoods monster. Ultimately, what helps them defeat the Flatwoods monster isn't them throwing everything they can at the monster until it comes down, but rather their wits allowing them to navigate a dangerous situation until they are able to achieve a condition that allows them to escape unscathed. DANDADAN's character writing is quite satisfying to witness unfold and leads to some pretty memorable characters being presented to the audience, or at least I found a lot of its character writing to be quite memorable. I find the way that every character essentially has some kind of unseemly or otherwise annoying facet to their personality makes them feel a lot more human and likable. DANDADAN's way of sort of passively changing what you come to associate with a character's personality can be quite memorable too. Specifically as an example, I really like Turbo Granny and how she starts off as a relatively menacing antagonist, but becomes a crucial part of the main crew very early into the story, going from like a spiritual weirdo to a spiritual gremlin kind of character almost, yet one that also portrays this deep sense of wisdom that is at times incredibly necessary for the characters to move ahead. DANDADAN's central character dynamic between Okarun and Momo Ayase is also incredibly believable and incredibly fun to witness unfold. I feel like DANDADAN's narrative foundation would crumble under the ambitions it has if the central two main characters weren't as interesting to see interact as they are. Even the battle shonen elements would probably feel incredibly aimless if the will they won't they of Okarun and Momo wasn't as strong as it was in guiding the narrative. Even if the side characters were lackluster, which I would argue DANDADAN does not have any issue with side characters, then functionally the main dynamic being written as it is would still probably be enough of a draw for me to recommend the series. As much as the two leads will bicker and fight, you can tell that they care for each other and that they deeply respect one another. It is incredibly wonderful to see a narrative unfold where the two characters are two people that don't really know who they are in the world, but will discover that through interacting with one another. It's like the narrative equivalent of that one phrase, which is "to be loved is to be changed." Dandadan is also a pretty interesting example of the found family trope within storytelling. After certain arcs, you will get this scene where the main characters find themselves around a table eating dinner together, and typically one or two characters from the arc that just concluded will be added to that group. I think the idea of using food as a form of visual imagery to describe like a link between every person is incredibly interesting, and the only other manga/anime I've seen really tackle that idea is Dungeon Meshi. Dandadan is also just incredibly fun to behold when it comes to its sort of vague power systems / the monster of the week structure it kind of takes. I personally love monster of the week structures, but I can see how somebody might become tired of that. So like quote unquote 1 week it'll be aliens, 1 week it'll be spirits, 1 week it'll be cryptids. And speaking of cryptids, Dandadan does this really interesting thing where like its major set of antagonists can be split into either aliens or spirits / yokai, though some critters that show up from time to time are also commonly accepted facets of cryptozoology. And in the way they're presented, the cryptids kind of contain both facets of spirits, yet also are kind of like aliens or are typically associated with aliens. So it's almost like you have three groups of antagonists, and the cryptids as a representative of this third vague group are like a blending together or almost bridging point between the two defined outright main antagonist groups. The music of the Dandadan anime, composed by Kensuke Ushio, who did the Devilman Crybaby and Chainsaw Man Season 1 soundtrack, really stands out to me as being a fitting audible identity for Dandadan. While it's not something that I have on repeat like a lot of other anime OSTs, I definitely do still really like it. Maybe this is less a Dandadan original soundtrack specific thing and more a Kensuke Ushio's music thing, but overall it is memorable enough for me to mention it as far as something the anime adaptation of Dandadan does incredibly well. Also, the opening theme for Dandadan, Otonoke by Creepynuts, is incredibly catchy. I've had it on repeat since, well, actually since the anime opening leaked, like 2 or 3 months before the anime started airing. The animation for the opening is really stylish and memorable too, although the actual song is my favorite part of it for sure. The part that goes like like that sounds like the song is saying Dandadan, and I quite like that. And speaking of things that really help contribute to establishing Dandadan's audible identity within the anime adaptation, the sound design for the supernatural powers used, like when Okarun first intentionally transforms with Turbo Granny's powers, absolutely wonderful. The voice actors, both in the original Japanese audio and the English dub, are really fitting for the characters and are just generally fun / easy to listen to. I find Okarun specifically to have an incredibly fitting voice in the original Japanese audio. Turbo Granny, being voiced by Luffy's voice actor in the Japanese audio, is also very funny to me. I am so used to hearing her as Luffy at this point. I find while I prefer the Japanese voices, in the English dub at least, the written dialogue is a lot more natural / the slang and word choices used feels a lot more casual and in line with the way students actually speak, at least going into it as an English speaker, acknowledging that there are intricacies of Japanese that I wouldn't pick up on. Dandadan's animation is absolutely wonderful across the board, between the minute moments to the most bombastic of action sequences. I do feel like you lose some of the sheer stylistic grit that comes from the manga art of Yuki Nobutatsu. That said, the character animation specifically makes up for it in my eyes. I mean, the whole of an anime adaptation will generally make make up for specific medium things that you lose out on going from manga to anime. But at least in regards to just how detailed Yuki Nobutatsu's art is in the manga of DANDADAN, I feel the expressiveness of the character animation more than makes up for it in certain areas. I absolutely have to praise the fight scene animation too. DANDADAN's fights are incredibly visually spectacular, and what's interesting is that the fight set pieces in DANDADAN as a whole, going past where the anime adapts from the manga, they only get better. So for these early story fights to be as presented as shockingly well as they are, despite more better things to come down the line, well, it's just incredibly exciting to see what else Science Saru will pull out. DANDADAN Season 1 takes this experimental approach to utilizing color within its fight scenes. Like, the fight against the Flatwoods monster in Episode 2 is primarily black and white, save for the red accents of Okurun's Turbo Granny form. In general, I think the visual art direction of DANDADAN's anime adaptation is wonderful, and I can only see its level of experimentation and thoughtfulness as going up from here. Despite Season 2 of DANDADAN's anime adaptation seeming like it is actually one half of a 24 episode season that was split in two, it's looking like Season 2 will already have the chance to get a leg up over Season 1's triumphs. That said, DANDADAN's narrative as a whole, and DANDADAN Season 1 specifically, aren't all sunshine and rainbows. There are some things in DANDADAN's early narrative that might prove a very valid reason for why somebody would bounce off of it. In regards to the note that Season 1 ends on specifically, there are some things I just wouldn't feel comfortable not acknowledging if I were to recommend this series to people, which is what this video was ultimately about. Me believing that DANDADAN is worth a watch / is generally of value despite the things I might not agree with its narrative having, or the anime adaptation doing as it does. So the biggest thing for me that I would complain about when it comes to Season 1 of the anime specifically is the point it ends on. Our main characters have made the trek to a house outside of town in order to exercise it because its inhabitant, Momo's childhood friend Gigi, claims that it is haunted by a spirit. Episode 12 of Season 1 adapts Chapter 33 and Chapter 34, with the final note that Chapter 33 ends on being the implication that some part of Gigi's house has been boarded over and is filled with talisman in order to keep something there or keep something out. Basically, narrative visual shorthand to express the idea that something is very, very wrong. You know, a cliffhanger for the season to end off on that leaves you wondering what's gonna happen next. If the anime ended at simply adapting Chapter 33 and ending off on that cliffhanger, I wouldn't have any issue with it whatsoever. My issue is with the way that Episode 12 of the anime takes part of Chapter 34, sticks it unnaturally to the end of what would be Chapter 33, and then leaves the season off on that point. This scene in Chapter 34 involves Momo breaking off from the main group and being cornered by a group of older men in a bathhouse alone all by herself. My main bone to pick with this sequence is that in the manga, right after we see Momo start to get cornered by these men, she kicks their asses and escapes unscathed, whereas the anime adaptation leaves off on Momo being pushed underwater by one of these men and pinned down. My issue with this sequence isn't necessarily the idea that DANDADAN shouldn't at all attempt to portray sexual assault as a concept, and more, the way it does so is almost very sensational in how it's trying to get you to either read the manga to find out what happens next, or excitedly wait 7 months until Season 2 releases to find out if the young girl gets raped. Is that not really fucking gross? I am just kind of shocked at what the broader perspective on the anime community is on this scene, because some of the language I've seen used almost implies that people are snowflakes for not wanting to see this as the point the anime ends off on. You know, I understand that Dandadan presents this as directly a bad thing, and it doesn't need to tell the audience, oh look, this is a bad thing, you shouldn't like to see this. In fact, this does kind of make me think to the quote that goes something along the lines of, art should disturb the comforted and comfort the disturbed. That said, I just don't like the anime ending off on this point, and I can't understand why it would be an intentional decision that somebody would make. I am of the belief that a 24 episode season was ordered, and they cut it down to half for production reasons or whatnot, leading to a very unfortunate cliffhanger, because otherwise, with how fantastic the Dandadan adaptation was beforehand, I just cannot fathom them consciously making this decision. Conscious decision or not, though, it's still incredibly gross and incredibly uncomfortable. This shouldn't be a hot take, but I do not enjoy seeing characters get sexually assaulted within the media I engage with. I recognize that as an adult, it is my choice not to engage with a piece of media if it does something I dislike or is generally something that makes me uncomfortable. I also recognize that within the artwork that I engage with, sometimes I should be made uncomfortable, and sometimes covering more adult topics like that is generally necessary for the narrative that is being told. This isn't me being prudish. This isn't me thinking that sexual assault as a concept shouldn't be covered within storytelling. This isn't me saying that specifically in the past, Dandadan hasn't presented the idea of sexual assault within its narrative in a way that isn't respectful or otherwise doesn't contribute towards the plot in some form. This is me disliking and disagreeing with a directorial decision that was made by somebody who didn't write the story itself. Now, do I have some issue with Momo and Okarun's sexual assault in Chapter 1/Episode 1 being used as an inciting incident? Personally, yes, I do find it a little weird. I do find it a little uncomfortable. I'm not sure if it really contributes as much to the plot as it should. Like, I recognize that this is in some form meant to lead to the perspective we're granted on Turbo Granny and the location-bound spirit being connected to the mistreatment of young girls. I don't know though. I bring all of this up as a way of saying I can very much critique and dislike parts of Dandadan while also liking and praising other parts of it. You know, it makes me think to Sanji's pervert gag in One Piece, or even just Master Roshi's entire character in Dragon Ball. It's obviously a lot heavier and touchier of a subject when it comes to things like the portrayal of sexual assault within narratives, but generally it's like I can see the positives of a story even while also dealing with things I consider as very large negatives. Everybody has different personal standards and thresholds for how certain things are portrayed or what certain things are portrayed. What I might be more comfortable overlooking to somebody else would be a complete no-no when it comes to engaging with something going forward. As easy as it is to want to classify something into tiers of good or bad, done well or poorly, it benefits all of us to be willing to discuss and acknowledge the more complicated facets of the media we digest. I wouldn't be comfortable discussing Dandadan without acknowledging the things I presented before, as I don't believe I can classify it in somewhat black and white terms based off of how certain things made me feel. There are things that Dandadan does that I love and think make it worth engaging with, or at least acknowledging as a piece of art, and there are also some things that I find fucking gross and think need to be called out for the shit they are. My opinion does not need to be a binary, I think this thing is good or I think this thing is bad, and I would implore others to apply that line of thinking to anything they engage with, whether they straight up 110% love it, think it's perfect, or whether they think something is completely fucking awful with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Would I recommend a watch/read of Dandadan to somebody? Well, I think that depends on what each individual person is comfortable with as far as the subject matter that the art they consume generally attempts to tackle, / how it tackles it. If you want to know how I feel, I think, as far as battle shonens go, Dandadan is one of the best. It does enough of what's been proven to already work in its own unique enough way, with some extra bits and bolts added on, to where I find it not only an incredibly memorable new generation shonen manga, but one that offers a lot to learn and grow from based off of the individual things it does that it has over other narratives within its vague category. I am recording this after I spent around 5 hours reading from chapter 34 to chapter 177. If that is not the most unemployed thing I have said when making these videos thus far, I am not sure what else would be. To avoid giving specifics, yet still present my feelings somewhat on where Dandadan starts to go after season 1 of the anime, truly, the best has yet to be adapted, which is shocking considering the sheer quality of what the source material has become with the effort of the anime adaptation put behind it. Even like the story content that season 1 technically left off at the start at and season 2 will pick up on, the arc that happens, after the point that season 1 ends on is one of the most nuanced and emotionally strong up to that point. The stakes from which fights are fought on only get greater. The actual foundations behind the fights themselves only get more ambitious, grandiose, and like you'll have absolutely no idea what comes next feeling. There's a character named Vamola who has one of the most tragic backstories within Dandadan's narrative, and it is connected to one of Dandadan's most long-running and in-depth arcs to date. And the arc after Vamola's backstory is introduced in, we get a new character named Zuma, who also has an incredibly memorable, incredibly tear-jerking, and incredibly well-presented backstory, which interweaves incredibly with the main plot of the arc. Like, I'd thought that the Acrobat Silky arc and the Evil Eye arcs did a fantastic job of demonstrating Dandadan's emotional core, but frankly, I don't think the world is ready to see Dandadan adapt some of the arcs that come after where the anime currently is. For all you people out there who liked Hunter x Hunter's Greed Island arc, I'm not really one of them personally. It is actually probably my least favorite arc in the story, but that is something for another video, certainly. I think one of the most recently concluded arcs in Dandadan's manga, past where the anime is currently adapting, completely blows Greed Island out of the water and arguably achieves a lot of similar ideas in a way I feel is more brisk and generally interesting to follow. Albeit taking into account that some of my complaints with the Greed Island arc come down to how the 2011 anime paced it. Again, something to talk about for another day. The current arc concept for where Dandadan is in the manga is a little hard to say for me personally, but the vague image I do have of it in my head is like, whoa, this is some major status quo shifting shit. And I absolutely cannot wait to see where it goes from here. There might be some things I'd critique / find disagreeable about Dandadan. If you're willing to meet Dandadan halfway, or you're comfortable pushing past some of the icky stuff, I truly believe there is no other shonen currently running week to week right now that is as passion-filled, creative, and heartfelt as Dandadan consistently shows itself to be. I'm really glad that I decided to give Dandadan a chance, and I think if you're comfortable doing that, you'll come out of it feeling really glad too.